October 11th, 1944. North Pacific, 180 miles northeast of Saipan. Commander Yasumasa Nakagawa stood motionless in the dim red light of submarine RO-41's control room, eyes fixed on the trembling needle of the depth gauge. 245 feet. The gauge quivered with each distant thud from above, the echo of another American depth charge searching for him in the black water. The whisper came from the hydrophone station. "Contact, sir. 12 destroyers. Bearing 210. Range closing." Nakagawa didn't move. He didn't have to. He'd heard that sound before. The steady rhythm of propellers slicing through the Pacific. The mechanical heartbeat of American hunters. He'd commanded RO-41 for 8 months, survived 14 depth charge attacks. He knew the pattern, he knew the precision, he knew the odds. 12 destroyers, each one equipped with the new QHB sonar. Detection range, 3,000 yards. Accuracy, near perfect. His submarine's hydrophones could hear them at barely 800. The Americans could see in 3 dimensions. Nakagawa could only listen and guess. Mathematically, that wasn't combat. It was execution. The ocean around Saipan was warm, open, and merciless. No undersea ridges to hide behind. No thermocline layer, at least not according to the charts. But Nakagawa remembered something. 3 months earlier, a single report. 1 paragraph from commander of I-19, describing temperature inversions south of Saipan, a line where sonar beams bent upward instead of down. It had sounded like a rumor. Tonight, it was all he had. "Orders, sir," asked the executive officer, his voice barely above a whisper. Nakagawa studied the depth gauge again. 245 feet. Temperature, 78 degrees Fahrenheit. "Take us to 280 feet, he said quietly. Slow descent, silent running. The officer hesitated. "Sir, that exceeds hull." "I know." Nakagawa interrupted. "Do it." The hull groaned as RO-41 sank lower. Every creak of metal sounded like a scream. The submarine's safe limit was 245 feet. At 280, the ocean was no longer an environment. It was a weapon pressing in from every side. The QHB sonar pulsed from above, a burst at 24 kilohertz, reflected off the water layers, returning with mechanical precision. Each destroyer plotted bearing, range, and depth. Each commander received the data through radio. Their attack would be synchronized, one ship maintaining sonar contact, others circling into position for the kill. The Americans hunted in patterns, not guesses. Each depth charge was a mathematical solution. Each explosion, a data point. Japan's submarines? Hydrophones, not sonar. No transmissions, no ranging, only sound and the man interpreting it. Nakagawa knew his disadvantage wasn't bravery. It was physics. At 260 feet, the temperature gauge shifted 76 degrees. At 275, 68, a 10-degree drop in 30 feet. He exhaled slowly. "There," he whispered, "a thermocline." "Level at 280 feet, the executive officer said. Nakagawa nodded. "Full stop. Silent running." The engines went quiet. The hum of the motors faded. The submarine became a capsule of breath and heartbeat suspended in the cold black water. Above, the destroyers pulsed their sonar again. The sound waves traveled downward, hit the thermocline, and curved upward. To the Americans, RO-41 had vanished, but the layer wasn't perfect. Low-frequency noise still traveled. Machinery vibrations could betray them. One careless movement could kill them all. Nakagawa stepped through the control room, locking eyes with each crewman. No words, just the look of a man whose silence was the difference between air and water. Somewhere near the aft section, A young torpedo operator shifted his stance. The scrape of his boot echoed like thunder through the hull. Above, the destroyers reacted. The propellers' sounds intensify.
3 ships converging. They'd heard something. Not enough to fix position, but enough to guess. Depth charges, whispered the hydrophone operator.
Bearing 340. Range 800 yards.
Nakagawa closed his eyes, counted seconds. Depth charges fell at 10 feet per second. Surface to 280. 28 seconds. At 20, he heard it, the faint descending whistle. At 25, the first detonation. The shockwave slammed through the hull like a hammer. Lights flickered. Dust fell from pipes overhead. Glass cracked. The hull flexed under pressure that could kill them instantly. 12 explosions. Then silence. Nakagawa glanced at the depth gauge. Still 280 feet. Still below the thermocline. Still invisible. The Americans were guessing now. Battery power, 40%, said the engineer quietly. Nakagawa did the math in his head. 6 hours of silent running. Maybe less. But surfacing now was suicide. The destroyers would be waiting. He needed to move, but movement meant noise. Unless... He looked at the hydrophone operator. Time their sonar pulses, he ordered. All 12 ships. I need to know when they listen and when they don't. The operator began his work, pencil scratching, seconds ticking. The control room waited in silence that felt like centuries. Finally, the whisper came. Sir, there's a synchronization gap. Every 127 seconds, all 12 destroyers pause simultaneously for 4.2 seconds. Nakagawa nodded. On my mark, he said. Ahead 1/3, 4 seconds, then stop. The electric motors engaged. The submarine moved. Nakagawa counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. All stop. Silence returned. No response from above. They hadn't been heard. He repeated the maneuver 8 times. Each shift moved the submarine 30 yards. Each time, the destroyers dropped charges on empty ocean. Above, the American pattern widened. Their propellers drifted apart. They were losing contact. But RO-41's hull was failing. Rivets leaked salt water. A seam line hissed under pressure. The metal was holding for now. The executive officer whispered, Sir, recommend ascending. Nakagawa shook his head. If we surface, we die in 5 minutes. If the hull fails, we die in 30 seconds. I'll take the 30. 52 minutes below the thermocline. The Americans were gone, or at least far enough. Ascend to 200 feet, Nakagawa ordered. The submarine rose slowly, creaking like a wounded animal. At 200 feet, the pressure eased. The hull sighed as if exhaling. But the batteries were almost dead. 20% power, no air circulation, temperature rising. Shut everything down, Nakagawa said. Minimum life support. We drift until dark. The control room went black, save for 2 dim lights. The air grew hot, stale, heavy with carbon dioxide. The men lay still to conserve oxygen. Through the hydrophones, Nakagawa tracked the destroyers. Their pattern widened. Their propellers grew faint. The Americans were chasing ghosts now. 6 hours later, the sun set. Surface, he ordered. At 60 feet, he raised the periscope. The ocean was empty. At 70, the submarine broke the surface. Nakagawa climbed the conning tower. The first breath of night air hit him. Cool, sharp, alive. Start diesels, course 285, full speed. The engines roared. RO-41 turned northwest, leaving behind the place of their near death. By midnight, they were 40 miles clear. In the control room, the executive officer approached. Sir,
How did you know the thermocline would be there? Nakagawa reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded note, the I-19 commander's report. I didn't know, he said. I gambled.
And if you'd been wrong?
Nakagawa smiled faintly. Then we wouldn't be talking. He looked toward the dark water stretching endlessly around them. The Americans have better machines, he said quietly, but they don't have the ocean. The officer frowned. They have it too. Yes, Nakagawa said. They just don't understand it yet. Aboard USS Haggard, Commander James Rolston stared at the sonar plot. 8 hours, 57 depth charge runs. No contact. The submarine hadn't escaped. It had vanished. His sonar officer approached. Sir, we lost contact at exactly 265 feet. All 12 ships? Yes, sir. Simultaneous loss. Rolston paused. Temperature data? Surface, 82 degrees. No deep measurements recorded. Rolston leaned over the chart table. Then we missed it, he said quietly. Thermocline layer. The sound bent away. The submarine didn't disappear. It hid under physics. He wrote a note. Thermocline interference suspected.
Recommend temperature profiling equipment for future ASW ops.
That report would reach Washington 3 months later. By January 1945, American destroyers carried bathythermographs, instruments mapping temperature by depth. Sonar blind spots vanished, but for one night in October 1944, RO-41 slipped through history, invisible, silent, undefeated. When it returned to Curry Naval Base weeks later, Nakagawa's patrol report became doctrine. When hunted by sonar, descend below the thermocline. Accept the risk. Trust the ocean. He knew it was temporary. Technology always catches up. But for that night, physics favored the desperate. 1 year later, RO-41 was found and destroyed by USS Conklin. Depth charges detonated through 2 mapped thermocline layers. No survivors. Nakagawa's final report, recovered after the war, was translated at the U.S. Naval Submarine School. It ended with one line: the ocean gives advantages to those who understand it.
But technology always takes them back.
By dawn, the Pacific was calm again. A surface so still it could have been painted on glass. But underneath, 200 feet below, another world churned with noise and ghosts. The ocean was alive with echoes. Sonar pings, propeller wash, the electric pulse of death traveling through salt water. The men aboard RO-41 had survived the night. They moved slowly, their bodies still vibrating from the shockwaves. Salt crusted on their lips. Their ears rang from hours of concussive thunder. Every breath tasted of metal and diesel. Survival was not triumph. It was just a pause between 2 hunts. Nakagawa stood again at the periscope, scanning the horizon. Nothing but an empty sea, stretching forever. No ships, no smoke, no salvation.
He turned to his executive officer.
Bring us down to periscope depth. We'll recharge batteries. The order came out steady, calm, but his hands trembled when he lowered them. He hit it quickly. Commanders couldn't show fear, even when the ocean pressed it into their bones. The diesel engines coughed to life, filling the narrow corridors with their deep, rhythmic thrum. The engineer called out, "Charging batteries, 40 minutes. 40 minutes." That was all they had to restore power before the next patrol line crossed their sector. Every minute was risk, every sound a signature. But silence was death, too. Without air, without electricity, the submarine was a coffin. On the bridge of the USS Haggard, Captain Rolston watched his men reset sonar sweeps. They had no illusions. The Japanese submarines were getting smarter. They were using the ocean itself as camouflage. Rolston had been hunting submarines for nearly 2 years. He'd sunk 3, but this one,
the phantom contact near Saipan was different. They had thrown everything at it: depth charges, hedgehogs, coordinated sweeps, and even smoke markers to plot drift. And still, nothing. The Navy called these new tactics acoustic ghosts, but Rolston knew ghosts didn't bleed. Somewhere under that glass-flat ocean, a real submarine had outplayed 12 destroyers, and that was unacceptable. "Get me temperature readings," he barked. "Sir, we don't have—" "I don't care. Drop a thermometer over the side. Get me something." A few minutes later, a sailor handed him the reading. Surface temperature, 82 degrees Fahrenheit. 50 feet, 81 degrees Fahrenheit. 100 feet, 77 degrees Fahrenheit. 200, 69 degrees Fahrenheit. Rolston looked at the numbers and felt his stomach twist. "Sonar distortion layer," he muttered. "Goddamn thermocline." The ocean had hidden its enemy. He turned to his XO. "We're changing the playbook. From now on, we map temperature before we drop charges. If there's a sound layer, we compensate." That line would later appear, word for word, in the Navy's Anti-Submarine Warfare Manual, published in 1945. Meanwhile, RO-41 surfaced again that night, running dark and fast. They couldn't use radio. The Americans could triangulate transmissions, so Nakagawa relied on dead reckoning, celestial fixes, and his memory of ocean currents. He was heading toward Truk Lagoon, 1,000 miles west. It was still Japanese-held, for now, but the Americans had been bombing it relentlessly. The base was shattered, fuel depots gone, docks burning. If they reached it, they might find only wreckage. The men didn't ask questions. They worked in silence, the way men do when sound means death. Nakagawa allowed them cigarettes on the bridge, a small mercy in the black Pacific night. The stars hung low, mirrored on the sea, until it was impossible to tell which was sky and which was reflection. The hydrophone operator broke the silence. "Sir, multiple contacts, bearing 120, distant, slow screws." Nakagawa listened. "Cargo ships." He heard their rhythm. 3 blades, steady, heavy. "Convoy," he said quietly. "Probably American resupply. A chance, but also a trap." He looked at his charts. The course aligned with a known hunter-killer group, destroyers screening for submarines. He made his decision. Rig for silent running. Periscope depth. Prepare tubes 1 through 4. At 4,400. RO-41 broke the surface tension. The periscope rose like a ghost. Nakagawa adjusted the lens. There, silhouettes on the horizon. 1 large transport, 2 smaller ships behind it. He estimated 2,500 yards. Range, perfect. Speed, 8 knots. He calculated firing angles with a grease pencil. No computers, no radar. Just intuition and math written in fog on glass. The torpedo officer whispered, "Target locked, tubes ready." Nakagawa watched the shadows for another moment, the way the ships moved, the wake lines behind them. He waited for his moment, the crosshair aligned. Fire 1. Fire 2. 2 streaks of compressed air hissed away. The submarine jolted slightly. The crew held their breath. 30 seconds, 40, 55. Then, a distant flash. A rolling bloom of fire rose on the horizon, orange against the black. The lead transport split in 2, flames pouring from the hull. The second torpedo missed, detonating harmlessly in open water. Nakagawa didn't wait. Dive. 200 feet. Hard left rudder. The submarine angled down, slipping under as the destroyer escorts began their retaliation. The hydrophones screamed with propeller cavitation. The Americans were coming. Inside the submarine, chaos became rhythm. Men at their posts, eyes locked on gauges. Every sound, a message. Every vibration, a warning. The first depth charges fell within minutes. 4 detonations, close enough to shake bolts loose from the ceiling. The men clenched their jaws. A few whispered prayers, quiet, hurried, desperate. Nakagawa's face was calm. He had become the still point in the storm. He waited for the pattern, the predictable rhythm of the destroyer's attack runs. They were firing blind, but they would adjust soon. They always did. He counted. 8 seconds between detonations, then 6, then 4. The destroyer was walking the explosions closer. Nakagawa ordered a hard turn to starboard, throttling one motor, cutting the other. The submarine rotated in near silence, shifting its acoustic signature just enough. The next wave of charges detonated where they'd been, not where they were. The crew exhaled, not relief, not yet, but the smallest sliver of it. On the surface, the American destroyer USS Bailey swept its sonar beam in wide arcs. "Contact fading," shouted the sonar operator. "Adjust course, bearing 275. The destroyer turned, closing in. Lieutenant Harris, the ship's sonar specialist, frowned. "Sir, something's off. The echo's splitting. It's like there are 2 of them." Captain Wilson leaned over his shoulder. "Explain." "I think the sound's refracting. Water temperature's uneven. We're hitting another thermocline." Wilson clenched his jaw. "Then we drop everything we've got, right through it." He gave the order. 36 depth charges rolled off the racks, sinking like a descending rain of metal. Each one set to different depths: 150, 200, 250, 300. The explosions tore through the ocean like thunder trapped in a jar. The shock waves echoed off the temperature layers, bouncing unpredictably. Some detonations boomed louder, others dull and far. But one was direct. RO-41 shuddered. Panels cracked. Lights went out. "Flooding in compartment 3, shouted a sailor. "Seal it," Nakagawa barked. "Battery acid leaking. Seal it." The compartment was closed. 2 men trapped inside. Nakagawa said nothing. He just listened as the water pressure finished its work. The sonar pings above resumed. The destroyers circling again. Nakagawa whispered to himself, "The ocean gives and takes." By mid-morning, RO-41 was crippled but alive. The flooding stopped. The engines groaned but held. They had evaded destruction, again, not by power, not by technology, but by patience and knowledge of the sea's invisible walls. Nakagawa sat in silence, his hands still on the chart table. He didn't look at the crew. He didn't need to. They knew the cost. Above, the Americans withdrew, believing the submarine destroyed. But the ocean didn't show graves. The next morning, the Pacific looked peaceful again. That cruel kind of calm that always followed violence. No oil slicks, no debris, no signs of what had happened beneath. Just an empty horizon under an indifferent sky. RO-41 lay crippled at 210 feet, drifting slowly northwest. Her hull creaked with every swell. Pumps coughed salt water from the flooded compartment. The air inside was heavy, thick with diesel, sweat, and a faint trace of chlorine from the damaged batteries. Men moved like shadows, eyes hollow, faces gray from exhaustion and silence. Nakagawa hadn't slept in 30 hours. He sat at the chart table, his logbook open to a half-written page. The pencil trembled in his hand. Enemy convoy engaged, 1 transport destroyed, sustained severe depth charge attack, hull damage, Section 3 compromised, proceeding to retreat course. He paused, staring at the words. They felt meaningless. The report would never be read by anyone who could change the war's outcome. Japan was already losing the sea. He knew it. Every commander knew it, but no one dared to say it aloud. He looked at his executive officer, a man barely 30, his face drawn and pale in the red emergency light.
How many of us believe we'll reach truck? Nakagawa asked quietly. The officer hesitated. All of us, sir. Nakagawa gave a thin smile.
That's what I thought. He closed the logbook.
That night, the sea changed again. The temperature dropped sharply. Rain fell in sheets, flattening the waves. For the first time in days, the submarine surfaced. They needed air, real air, to clear the toxic mix that had built up inside. The hatch opened with a hiss. The first man up gasped, the night wind hitting him like a flood of life. Nakagawa climbed to the bridge. The rain soaked him instantly, plastering his uniform to his skin. He looked around. No horizon, no stars, just black water blending into black sky. He breathed deeply, the air sharp and cold, smelling of ozone and salt. The engineer's voice echoed up the conning tower. Batteries at 58%, sir. Engines holding steady, but we're still leaking around the forward bulkhead. Nakagawa nodded. We'll make do. Set course, 285 degrees. Keep running until dawn. The diesels roared. The boat surged forward, slicing through the storm like a ghost
Returning home.
600 miles away, at the American base on Guam, a new kind of briefing was underway. A young naval scientist named Dr. Robert Aston stood before a room of officers. On the chalkboard behind him, a single word, thermocline. He tapped the board with his pointer. This is why we lost contact with RO-41, he said. Sonar beams don't penetrate through sharp temperature gradients. They refract upward, like light through water. The submarine didn't disappear. It used physics to bend our own sonar against us. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Aston continued. We need to start mapping temperature layers. Every patrol, every operation.
We can't fight what we can't detect.
One of the captains grunted. You're saying a Japanese commander outsmarted our sonar? Aston met his eyes. No, sir, I'm saying he understood the ocean better than we did. That exchange would be cited later in internal memos that led to the first U.S. Navy bathythermograph, an instrument designed to record water temperature at depth, layer by layer. A direct result of RO-41's disappearance. Back under the sea, RO-41 kept running. Day after day, pushing west, threading between hunter-killer groups. Each dive brought new groans from the hull. Each rise risked radar detection. But somehow, Nakagawa kept them alive. On November 3, 1944, they reached Truk Lagoon. What had once been a fortress of the Imperial Navy was now a graveyard. Sunken cruisers, half-submerged fuel tanks, the skeletons of aircraft poking through shallow water. Smoke still drifted over the horizon from old bomb craters. They surfaced quietly among the ruins. Nakagawa stood on deck, watching the outlines of wrecked ships, ships that had once ruled the Pacific. His men stood beside him in silence. No one cheered, no one spoke. The ocean lapped gently at twisted steel. This, he said quietly, is what happens when courage meets industry. No one answered. There was nothing to say. They stayed just long enough to refuel. 2 days later, RO-41 left Truk for her final patrol. Orders: intercept American shipping near Luzon. It was suicide. Everyone knew it. By then, the Americans had refined their technology. Their destroyers carried bathythermographic equipment, devices that measured and graphed water temperature every 50 feet. They could see thermoclines now. They could track submarines through them. The advantage Nakagawa had used was gone. Still, he went, because orders were orders, and because men like him didn't stop fighting just because logic said they should. January 15th, 1945.
West of Luzon, 2:47 a.m., the destroyer escort USS Conklin detected a faint sonar contact. Deep, slow, moving northwest. Sonar officer's note: Contact intermittent. Bearing 245. Depth approximately 270 feet. Sound layer detected at 260. Captain McAllister studied the data. Mark thermocline depth. Adjust charges accordingly. The new bathythermograph printed a temperature curve on wax paper, a jagged line that told them exactly where the sound barrier lay. Set first pattern for 270, second for 290. Fire when ready. At 2:58 a.m., the sea erupted. The explosions rolled through the depths like thunder in the bones of the world. Hydrophones on nearby ships recorded it. 12 detonations in precise sequence. Then, nothing. No return echoes, no hull noises, no survivors. RO-41 was gone. 3 months later, American intelligence recovered fragments of Nakagawa's patrol report from captured Japanese archives. The section on thermocline tactics was marked in red pencil and translated for immediate study. It became required reading at the U.S. Naval Submarine School. The name Nakagawa appeared once in small print as the first recorded commander to use a thermocline for evasion. His tactic bought the Japanese Navy 8 months of survival. It bought the U.S. Navy a permanent lesson. Years later, Dr. Aston, now working in naval research, would summarize it this way. The ocean doesn't belong to technology. It belongs to those who understand it. But understanding only delays inevitability. Innovation buys time. It doesn't buy victory. The story of RO-41 isn't about who won or who lost. It's about the thin line between survival and extinction, drawn not by courage or luck, but by physics itself. A commander who trusted the ocean more than his instruments, and a navy that learned from its enemy how to master the sea. If this story moved you, if you want to uncover more forgotten battles fought in silence beneath the waves, make sure to subscribe, like, and join us next time as we dive into another untold chapter of naval history. Because every wreck on the ocean floor still has a story, and we're here to bring it back to the surface.